Okay, my friends. So now we're reading chapters 10, 11, and 12. And that will get us caught up to where we left off when we were in school. So I'm on page 67, chapter 10. And thank you if you're listening or if you're reading along with me. You got to see my dogs. And you get to listen to me read the story again. So I hope you're enjoying it. I know I'm enjoying reading it to you, if you can't tell. So chapter 10. I told Gloria Dump everything. I told her how me and the preacher had just moved to Naomi and how I had to leave all my friends behind. And I told her about my mama leaving. And I listed out all the 10 things that I knew about her. And I explained that here in Naomi, I miss my mama more than I ever had in Wally. I told her about the preacher being like a turtle hiding all the time inside his shell. I told her about finding Winn Dixie in the produce department and how because of Winn Dixie, I became friends with Miss Franny Block and I got a job working for a man named Otis at Gertrude's Pets and how I got invited to Sweetie Pie Thomas's birthday party. I even told Gloria Dump how Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry called her a witch. But I told her they were stupid, mean, bald-headed boys, and I didn't believe them. Not for long, anyhow. And the whole time I was talking, Gloria Dump was listening. She was nodding her head, and she was smiling and frowning and saying, oh, is that right? I could feel her listening with her whole heart, and it felt good. You know what? She said when I was all done. What? Could be that you got more of your mama in you than just your red hair and your freckles and running fast. Really? Like what? Like maybe you got her green thumb. The two of us could go and plant something and see how it grows. Test out that thumb of yours. Oh, okay, I said. What Gloria Dump picked for me to grow was a tree. Or she said it was a tree. To me, it looked more like a plant. She had me dig a hole for it, put it in the ground, and pat the dirt around in tight like it was a baby, and I was tucking it into bed. What kind of tree is it? I asked Gloria Dump. It's a wait-and-see tree, she said. What's that mean? It means you gotta wait and see for it to grow before you know what it is. Can I come back tomorrow? Child, as long as this is my garden, you're welcome in it. But that tree ain't going to have changed much by tomorrow. But I want to see you too, said Gloria Dump. I ain't going nowheres. I'll be right here. I woke Winn Dixie up then. He had peanut butter in his whiskers. He kept yawning and stretching. He licked Gloria Dump's hand before we left, and I thanked her. That night, when the preacher was tucking me into bed, I told him how I got a job at Gertrude's Pets, and I told him about making friends with Miss Fanny Block and getting invited to Sweetie Pie Thomas's party. And I told him about meeting Gloria Dump. When Dixie lay on the floor waiting for the preacher to leave so he could hop up onto the bed like he always did. When I was done talking, the preacher kissed me goodnight, and then he leaned way over to give Winn Dixie a kiss too, right on top of his head. You can go on ahead and get on up there now, he said to Winn Dixie. When Dixie looked at the preacher, he didn't smile at him, but he opened his mouth wide like he was laughing, like the preacher had just told him the funniest joke in the world. And this is what amazed me the most. The preacher laughed back. When Dixie hopped up on the bed, the preacher got up and turned out the light. I leaned over and I kissed Winn Dixie too, right on his nose. But he didn't notice. He was already asleep and snoring. Chapter 11. Page 72. That night, there was a real bad thunderstorm. But what woke me wasn't the thunder and lightning. It was Winn Dixie, whining, butting his head against my bedroom door. Winn Dixie, what are you doing? He didn't pay any attention to me. He just kept beating his head against the door and whining and whimpering. And when I got out of bed and I went over and I put my hand on his head, he was shaking and trembling so hard that it scared me. I knelt down and I wrapped my arms around him, but didn't turn and didn't look at me, didn't smile or sneeze or wag his tail or do any normal kind of Winn Dixie thing. He just kept beating his head against the door, crying and shaking. You want the door open? I said, huh? Is that what you want? I stood up and I opened the door and Winn Dixie flew through it like something big and ugly and mean was chasing him. Winn Dixie, I hissed, come on back here. I didn't want him to go on ahead and wake up the preacher. But it was too late. Winn Dixie was already at the other end of the trailer in the preacher's room. I could tell because there was a spring sound that must have come from Winn Dixie jumping up on the bed, and then there was a sound from the preacher like he was surprised. But none of it lasted long because Winn Dixie came tearing back out of the preacher's room, panting and running like crazy. I tried to grab him, but he was going too fast. Opal? Said the preacher. He was standing at the door to his bedroom and his hair was all kind of wild on top of his head and he was looking around like he wasn't sure where it was. Opal? What's going on? I don't know, I told him. But then there was a huge crack of thunder, one so loud that it shook the whole trailer, and Winn Dixie came shooting back out of my room and went running past me, and I screamed, Daddy, watch out! But the preacher was still confused. He just stood there, and Winn Dixie came barreling right toward him like he was a bowling ball, and the preacher was the only pin left standing, and wham! They both fell to the ground. Uh-oh, I said. Opal? Said the preacher. He was lying on his stomach, and Winn Dixie was sitting on top of him, panting and whining. Yes, sir. Opal? Yes, sir. Do you know what pathological fear is? No, sir, I told him. The preacher raised a hand and he rubbed his nose. Well, he said after a minute, it's a fear that goes way beyond our normal fears. It's a fear you can't be talked out of or reasoned out of. Just then there was another crack of thunder, and Winn Dixie rose straight up in the air like somebody had poked him with something hot. When he hit the floor, he started running. He ran back to my bedroom, and I didn't even try to catch him. I just got out of his way. The preacher lay there on the ground, rubbing his nose. Finally, he sat up and he said, Opal, I believe Winn Dixie has a pathological fear of thunderstorms. And just when he finished his sentence, here came Winn Dixie again, running to save his life. I got the preacher up off the floor and out of the way just in time. There didn't seem to be a thing we could do for Winn Dixie to make him feel better, so we just sat there and watched her run back and forth, all terrorized and panting. And every time there was another crack of thunder, Winn Dixie acted like all over again it was surely the end of the world. The storm won't last long, the preacher told me. When it's over, the real Winn Dixie will come back. After a while, the storm did end. The rain stopped and there wasn't any more lightning. And finally, the last rumble of thunder went away and Winn Dixie quit running back and forth. He came over to where me and the preacher were sitting and he cocked his head and it was like he was saying, what in the world are you two doing out of bed in the middle of the night? And then he crept up on the couch with us in this funny way he has, where he gets on the couch an inch at the time, kind of sliding himself onto it, looking off in a different direction, like it's all happening by accident, like he doesn't intend to get on the couch, but all of a sudden there he is. And so the three of us sat there. I rubbed Winn Dixie's head and scratched him behind the ears the way he liked, and the preacher said, there are an awful lot of thunderstorms in Florida in the summertime. Yes, sir, I said. I was afraid that he would say that we couldn't keep a dog who went crazy with pathological fears every time there was a crack of thunder. Well, we'll have to keep an eye on him, the preacher said. He put an arm around Winn Dixie. We'll have to make sure he doesn't get out during a storm. He might run away. We have to make sure we keep him safe. Yes, sir, I said again. And all of a sudden it was hard for me to talk. I loved the preacher so much. I loved him because he loved Winn Dixie. I loved him because he was going to forgive Winn Dixie for being afraid. But most of all, I loved him for putting his arm around Winn Dixie like that, like he was already trying to keep him safe. Chapter 12. This, I think, is a new chapter. I'm going to go ahead and read it. But how many of you remember that after we read chapter 11, we dumped ideas in our idea journal of things that we might have pathological fears over? No one can talk us out of them. And remember, we ran around the room and we did a lightning share and we learned so much about each other, right? Because this is how we are, boys and girls. We learn about the good and the bad, the easy and the hard, right? We get deep. So that's such a good memory I have. I can't wait to get back to our classroom and do things like that again. All right, chapter 12, you ready? And then I'll stop it. I'll read just chapter 12 today. And then we'll do this. We'll keep going on chapters 13 and so on. Maybe tomorrow. So chapter 12. Me and Winn Dixie got to Gertrude's pit so early for my first day of work that the close sign was still in the window. Shows that she's very excited and responsible, right? But when I pushed open the door, it swung open, so I went inside. I was about to call out to Otis that we were there, but I heard music. It was the prettiest music I had ever heard in my life. I looked around to see where it was coming from, and that's when I noticed that all of the animals were out of their cages. There were rabbits and hamsters and gerbils and mice and birds and lizards and snakes. And they were all just sitting there on the floor like they had turned to stone. And Otis was standing in the middle of them. He was playing a guitar and he had on skinny, pointy-toed cowboy boots, and he was tapping them while he was playing his music, and his eyes were closed and he was smiling. Can you picture that in your head? Winn Dixie got a dreamy kind of look on his face. He smiled real hard at Otis, and then he sneezed, and then his whiskers went all fuzzy, and then he sighed, kind of dropped to the floor with all the other animals. Just then Gertrude caught sight of Winn Dixie. "Dog!" she croaked and flew over and landed on his head. Otis looked up at me. He stopped playing his guitar, and the spell was broken. The rabbits started hopping, and the birds started flying, and the lizards, well, they started leaping, and the snakes started slithering, and Winn Dixie started barking and chasing everything that was moving, and Otis shouted, "Help me!" For what seemed like a long time, me and Otis ran around trying to catch the mice and the gerbils and the hamsters and the snakes and the lizards. We kept on bumping into each other and tripping over the animals, and Gertrude kept screaming, "Dog, dog!" And every time I caught something, I'd put it back in the first cage I saw. I didn't care if it was the right cage or not. I just put it in and slammed the door. And the whole time I was chasing things, I was thinking about that Otis must be some kind of a snake charmer, the way he could play his guitar and make all the animals turn to stone. And then I thought, this is silly. I shouted over Winn Dixie barking and Gertrude yelling, and I said, "Play some more music, Otis!" He looked at me for a minute, and then he started playing his guitar. And in just a few seconds, everything went quiet. Winn Dixie was laying on the floor, blinking his eyes and smiling to himself and sneezing every now and then. And the mice and the gerbils and the rabbits and the lizards and the snakes that hadn't been caught yet got quiet and sat still. And I picked them up one by one and I put them back in their cages. When I was all done, Otis stopped playing. He looked down at his boots. I was just playing them some music. It makes them happy. "Yes, sir," I said. "Did they escape from their cages?" "No." I take them out. I feel sorry for them being locked up all the time. I know what it's like being locked up. You do? I said. I've been in jail, said Otis. He looked up at me real quick and then he looked back down at his boots. You have? Yes, I have. Never mind, said Otis. Aren't you here to sweep the floors? Yes, sir, I said. He walked over to the counter and he started digging through a pile of things and he finally came up with a broom. Here, he said, you should start sweeping. Only he must have gotten confused. He was holding out his guitar to me instead of the broom. With your guitar? I asked. He blushed and he handed me the broom and I started to work. I'm a good sweeper. I swept the whole store and then dusted some of the shelves. The whole time I worked, Winn Dixie followed me and Gertrude followed him, flying behind him and sitting on his head and his back and croaking real quiet to herself, Dog, dog. When I was done, Otis thanked me. I left Gertrude's pets thinking about how the preacher probably wouldn't like it very much that I was working for a criminal. Sweetie Pie Thomas was waiting for me right out front. I seen that, she said. She stood there sucking on her knuckle and staring at me. Seen what? I asked. I seen her roll those animals out of their cages, keep 'em real still. Is that man magic? She asked. Kind of, I told her. She hugged Winn Dixie around the neck. Just like this grocery store dog, right? Right, I said. I started walking and Sweetie Pie took her knuckle out of her mouth and put her hand in mine. Are you coming to my birthday party? I surely am. The theme is pink. I know it. I gotta go, she said all of a sudden. I gotta go home and tell my mama about what I seen. I live right down there in that yellow house. That's my mama on the porch. You see her? She's waving at you. I waved at the woman on the porch and she waved back, and I watched Sweetie Pie run off to tell her mama about Otis being a magic man. Made me think about my mama and how I wanted to tell her the story about Otis charming all those animals. I was collecting stories for her. I would also tell her about Miss Franny and the bear and about meeting Gloria Dump and believing for just a minute that she was a witch. I had a feeling that these were the kind of stories my mama would like, the kind that would make her laugh out loud, the way the preacher said she liked to laugh. So boys and girls, do you remember in school when we were talking about how it was very unexpected that Sweetie Pie Thomas, at only 5 years old, was constantly hanging out at Gertrude's Pets? Well, come to find out, she's like a neighbor of Gertrude's Pets, and Mom sits out on the porch and watches her play. And part of her playtime is probably looking in the window at all of the animals. So that's sensible, right? And the one unexpected thing that we learned is that Otis has been in jail, and that Opal is wondering how the preacher, her dad, would take it to know that he was a criminal. Now, she's saying that he's a criminal, and I think that that is her best guess. She's inferring that he's a criminal, but do we really know that he was a criminal? Just because he was in jail, does that make him a criminal? I'm not so sure, right? So we're going to have to learn more about Otis. And Opal had a great first day of work. And we also learned that Otis is a really good guitarist and musician, and the animals were in this mindful trance. Okay, so that's all for today, my friends. Tomorrow, stay tuned. I'm going to read probably chapters 13 and 14. See you then. Bye-bye.